Today is August 27th, and it is the anniversary of the Battle of the Old Stonehouse, which is a part of the overall Battle of Brooklyn or Battle of Long Island and the much larger Battle for New York that took place in 1776. Thank you for joining me. We're going to continue our talk about the Battle for New York that occurred throughout the second half of 1776. So if you haven't watched my previous videos about this, you can check them out. Otherwise, how about a little bit of a recap? So as we talked about previously, in 1776, the British need possession of Manhattan Island, right? Think about it. They're fighting a war away from home. They need a forward operating base, and they've identified Manhattan Island as being the best spot for that to happen. Why? Well, think about it geographically. Manhattan Island is right there at New York Harbor, which is almost in the middle of the colonies where the British will be fighting. It's also directly accessible from the Atlantic Ocean, and if you put your troops on Manhattan Island, you can defend them with ships in New York Harbor, ships in the Hudson River, and ships in the East River. Now, also, the Hudson River allows you access up into the northeastern part of the colonies, and the East River allows access out into the Long Island Sound and the North Shore of Long Island and New England. So it is an excellent strategic spot for the British. Now, they figured this out, but of course, Washington has figured this out as well. So the year 1776, the military part, at least the whole political part, of course, is going on in Philadelphia, and that's a parallel story to this one. But the military part is unfolding in New York City. Washington wants to keep the British from taking possession of Manhattan. They want to take possession of Manhattan. Now, they have troops on Staten Island, so they're getting ready to invade from Staten Island. They also have ships in all of those waterways. They have drawn Washington onto Manhattan Island because part of their plan is to not only take it for themselves, but to defeat Washington's army there. So if they can get Washington's army onto the island, surround it, attack it, and defeat him there, they can take the island, and then they can travel throughout the rest of the colonies, putting down any further rebellion that pops up. So that is the British strategy for the summer of 1776. And of course, Washington's role is going to be to try to prevent that from happening. Now, the Battle for New York began on August 22nd. That was 5 days ago, when General William Howe transported about 22,000 troops from Staten Island across the Narrows, or the Verrazano Narrows as it's called, to Brooklyn, and they landed in Brooklyn. This drew Washington's army over to Brooklyn, and for the next 7 days, the two armies will engage throughout Brooklyn. The Battle of Brooklyn, as it's called, used to be called the Battle of Long Island. So if you look it up, you might find it listed as the Battle of Long Island. They are the same, the Battle of Long Island and the Battle of Brooklyn. So now we're a few days into the battle. It is August 27th. The battle has moved further into Brooklyn, and we're at the Old Stonehouse, or the Cortelyou House, where the next engagement will occur. Now, it seems a little strange that General Howe has drawn Washington out into Brooklyn when it would have been so easy for him to attack him on Manhattan Island and defeat him there. And many of General Howe's detractors are going to bring this up and say, why did Howe go to Brooklyn rather than just attacking Washington on the bottom part of the island where he was, where they could have surrounded him on the East River and the Hudson River and the harbor and just attacked him there? And I'm thinking that the reason Howe didn't do that was that the English wanted to inhabit the city after they removed Washington from it, right? There's an entire city intact at the lower part of Manhattan Island. That was the colonial city of New York. And for the time, it was a rather advanced city. So why would Howe want to fight there, risking the destruction of so many structures, when he could draw Washington into Brooklyn, hopefully defeat him there, and then take possession of New York City with all of the structures intact? So I'm thinking that's really what General Howe is up to. Now, for us to further understand what's happening in the battle for New York, we really have to understand the two Howe brothers, General Sir William Howe commanding the Army, and Lord Admiral Richard Howe in command of the Navy. Now, the Howe brothers come from an aristocratic family of military officers, and their oldest brother had served in New York in the French and Indian War, and he was very well liked by the people where he was stationed up in the area of Albany. the state's capital today. And he led some regiments in the French and Indian War where he was killed. The people there loved him so much that they held a memorial for him, and they even put up a statue in his honor. So when it came time to debate in the parliament going to war against America, there were many voices against it. We don't really learn this in school, but there were many voices in England that were against fighting with the colonies. And two of those voices were the brothers Howe. General William Howe objected to fighting with the colonies because he said it was against the British way. He said that he, as a gentleman, did not find any pleasure in going to shoot the people who had so well honored his brother, and that these were subjects of the British crown. And as far as he believed, his job as a commander was to protect subjects of the crown, not attack them. So General Howe was not in favor of war with the colonies. His older brother, Lord Admiral Richard Howe, Lord Howe, was not in favor either because he said it was ridiculous to think they could win a war so far away. Everything would have to be transported there. He said, we don't know how many people we'll lose. We don't know if we'll lose ships. We don't know how many supplies won't make it. He says, and once we're there, if we have to move inland, we won't know where we are or what we're doing. We won't know who we're fighting. We won't know who's on our side and who's against us. He just said that logistically, it was just impossible to win. And he said there are far too many of them there, and they're all armed and prepared to fight. He suggested an armistice would be a much better path forward. Obviously, those arguments did not win out in the Parliament, and here we are, 1776, with both of these gentlemen now in command in the battle for New York. So understanding that background helps us understand a little bit of the decisions the Howes will be making throughout the summer and fall of 1776. Now, it's important to note that Washington initially thought the British attack on Brooklyn was a fake out and that he didn't really believe it was the main attack. But by August 27th, he realizes that this is the main assault. And that day, he joins the rest of the army in Brooklyn at the old Stonehouse. The Americans don't realize that they're being steadily outflanked to the east and the north by the British. For a time, they actually believe they're winning the day because it seems to them that the British are not taking the position that they want. But then an attack comes on them on multiple sides, and they have to stand and fight. And this is where the heroes that are remembered on the anniversary of this battle come in, and they are the Maryland 400 and Major General Lord Sterling. So who is this Lord Sterling? Who's this Lord fighting with General Washington? When I first saw his name, I was wondering, who is this Lord fighting on the American side? Well, he is an American. He's not a British Lord. His name is William Alexander, and he is a born and raised New Yorker. His father was James Alexander, one of the lawyers noted for the Zenger trial of 1735, which brought us the free press, and his mother, Mary Sprott Provost Alexander, one of the greatest lady merchants in all of New York history, descended by multiple generations of successful women merchants. Mrs. Alexander was known as one of the wealthiest ladies, probably one of the wealthiest merchants of her time, very well-respected woman. So these were his parents. Now, his family were the rightful heirs to Stirling and Scotland. And you might remember the English invaded Scotland, deposed the Scottish lords from their land, and divided up among themselves and created new lords who were English instead. William Alexander, his father really didn't care about this. He was an American. He didn't care about Scotland anymore. But William did, and he wanted that title for himself. And he actually hired a lawyer that went before the Parliament to argue that William Alexander was the rightful Earl of Stirling, and presented all of the family documents and paperwork to show the lineage that he was the rightful Earl of Stirling. And what do you think happened? Do you think a British Parliament full of all of these lords who've been given their land for really patronage reasons are going to vote to return that land to William Alexander? Of course they didn't. Not only did they vote against him, but they sent him a cease and desist order to stop using the title Earl of Stirling or Lord Stirling in America. So at that time, the Continental Congress that was meeting unanimously voted to declare William Alexander the rightful Earl of Stirling, or Lord Stirling. So he is the only ever declared American lord in our history. So this is who Lord Stirling is. The 400 Marylanders are under the command of Mordecai Gist, and they are, of course, from Maryland, and they're a militia unit that's come up to help fight in the Battle of New York. Gist, Stirling, and the 400 Marylanders are going to face off that day against thousands of British and Hessians, making a stand there at the Stonehouse that will enable Washington and the rest of his army to retreat up into Brooklyn Heights. A few years ago, I visited the Stonehouse and I made a video about that. So let's take a look at that video now. I'm here at the old Stonehouse in Brooklyn, and I'm really thrilled to be here today on August 27th, 1776. One of the most heroic events of the Battle of Long Island, or the Battle of Brooklyn, took place right here around us by the old Stonehouse. On August 22nd, Major General Lord Stirling and 400 Marylanders stood against nearly 2,000 British in the battle here. Stirling and the Marylanders, under command of Major Mordecai Gist, stood here against a massive English assault not far from the Gowanus Creek. Most of the Marylanders were lost that day. 100 were taken prisoner and about 250 were killed. Stirling himself refused to surrender to the British commander, walked right past him and offered his surrender to the Hessians, which accepted him. Now, although that battle was lost here and many fine men gave their lives, and one story tells that Washington was on a hilltop nearby watching, and he exclaimed, "What fine men I lose today," was heartbroken when he saw the losses, but it enabled Washington to regroup, move his army up into Brooklyn Heights, where tomorrow, August 28th, they'll be in Brooklyn Heights. Stirling, by the way, is going to be returned to Washington later in the year in a prisoner exchange. So this is the old Stonehouse in Brooklyn, and if you can ever get here to see it, it's near Prospect Park. Please come by and take a look at this incredible spot in American history. Now, every year on the anniversary, there's a commemoration held in Brooklyn of this incredible event. This year, it was a few days ago. It was on August 24th, and normally I attend. This year, I did not. But here I'll show you a few pictures of that event and the commemoration. As you can see here, there's a field with 256 flags honoring the 256 of the 400 who died here. There's a very solemn ceremony with a color guard and an honor guard, cannon firing, and also musket fire in honor of the men who were lost that day.
Color guard, halt. Color guard, left face. Fire! Prime and low.
Now, Stirling himself was taken prisoner. Stirling refused to surrender to a British officer because he hated them so much, and instead he surrendered to a Hessian officer. So Stirling was taken prisoner, as were many others, and he was later returned to Washington in a prisoner of war exchange. So now the old Stonehouse battle is completed. The Americans have been routed. Many have been killed, but that heroic stand of those men that day enabled Washington and his army to make it up into Brooklyn Heights, where something amazing and historic will happen in 2 more days. And I'll be back in 2 more days to tell you about that. Thank you for supporting my work here on YouTube. If you liked the video, please give it a like, subscribe to my channel, help my videos get more distributions, and also share it with your friends. So I will be back with you in 2 days on August 29th to tell you what happened then. It was one of the best stories on my Revolutionary War tour of New York. I'll see you then.